Hey everyone, we are tackling quadratic formula today. So if we go to page, I think 18, at the top you can see the formula that we're going to follow. So the point of the quadratic formula is if something cannot factor, then you have to use this formula. So on the past couple assignments, there have been, times where you find factors of C, but they don't add up to B, and that's okay. Now we know what to do next, which is to use quadratic formula. So the first thing I want to look at is problems 1 and 2. So if I were to solve problem number 1, as normal, I would find factors of 14. Okay, cool. Well, factors of 14, I got 1, 14, and I've got 2 and 7. So my goal is to get a negative 5. Well, I know I'm going to use 2 and 7. 2 is going to be positive, 7 is going to be negative. So I've got x minus 7, and then x plus 2. Next thing I gotta do is find what those zeros are by setting them equal to 0. So x minus 7 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. Now I solve. So I add 7 on both sides, minus 2 on both sides. So my zeros are x is 7 and negative 2. Okay, so there's my answers here. Well, let's say you found the factors, but you weren't quite sure which factors to use. So let's solve it again, but using the quadratic formula. So we know that the regular equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So for my first step, I want to find a, b, and c. So if I look at my equation, if there's nothing in front of x squared, it's like having a 1. So a is 1, b is negative 5, and c is negative 14. That sign does matter, so if there's a minus sign in front of it, make it a negative number. So the next thing I'm doing is following that formula that's given above. So the first thing in my equation is negative b. Well, I want you to treat it as like the opposite of b. So if I'm looking at number 2, b is negative 5. Well, the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. So I'm going to have 5 plus or minus, then I've got my radical. Well, under that radical, I have b squared first. So that's negative 5 squared. Then I have minus 4. Okay, that's always going to be there. And that minus 4 I'm going to multiply by a, which is 1, and c, which is negative 14. And then all of that is over 2 times a, and a is 1. Okay, so this is where I'm at. I've plugged my a, b, and c into my equation, and now I need to start breaking it down. So if I look at the stuff under the radical, that's what I want to plug in my calculator. So everything under the radical is what I want to plug in. So if I plug that in the calculator, I've got negative 5 squared. Well, that gives me 25. Okay, and then I've got negative 4 times 1 times negative 14. Well, that's a plus 56. So now my radical is 25 plus 56, which gives me 81. So I've got 5 plus or minus radical 81 all over 2, because 2 times 1 gives me 2. Once I get to this step, I want to find what that radical is. So the square root, or radical 81, gives me 9. So I have 5 plus or minus 9 over 2. So once I get to this point, what I need to do is split it up into 2, because that means 1 is plus and 1 is minus. That's where that plus or minus comes from. So I've got a 5 plus 9 over 2 and a 5 minus 9 over 2. Well, the next thing I got to do is solve that. So 5 plus 9 gives me 14. Divided by 2, I get 7. So there's one of them. The next one, I've got 5 minus 9. I get negative 4 over 2, which gives me negative 2. Well, if I look, my two answers here are 7 and negative 2. Well, if you look, it's the same thing that I had over here, 7 and negative 2. So it doesn't matter how you do it, you'll get that same answer. So that's how quadratic formula kind of works. But let's go ahead and do it again for number 3. So number 3, my first step is to find a, b, and c. I know that a is the number in front of x squared, in this case it's 2. I know that b is the number in front of x, which is 2, and c is negative 12. So now we need to plug it into that formula. So remember, I've got negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this is at the top of your booklet, by the way, so you don't need to rewrite it every time. So first thing I do is the opposite of b. So I've got a positive 2, the opposite is a negative 2. Then I do the plus or minus. After plus or minus, I have my radical. The first thing under the radical is 2, and I square it. Be sure when you're plugging that in your calculator that you put it in parentheses. If you don't put in parentheses, you might get a different answer. So we've got b squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, and c, which is negative 12, all over 2 times a, which is 2. So the next thing I'm doing is simplifying that radical. So I've got 2 squared. Well, that gives me 4. And then negative 4 times 2 times negative 12 gives me a positive 96. So now I'm going to go ahead and combine those. So I've got negative 2 plus or minus radical. 4 plus 96 gives me radical 100. All over 2 times 2, which gives me 4. So now the next thing I'm looking at is what is the square root or radical of 100? So I've got 10. So negative 2 plus or minus 10 over 4. Once I'm at that step, I can split it up into 2, where I've got negative 2 plus 10 over 4 and negative 2 minus 10 over 4. So you can plug them in the calculator or you can do the math, it doesn't matter. So negative 2 plus 10 gives me 8 over 4, which gives me 2. And then I've got negative 12 over 4, which gives me a negative 3. So my roots here are x equals 2 and negative 3. So there's number 3. Let's go ahead and do number 4. We're doing it that same way. So first step, I got to find A, got to find B, I got to find C. So A is the number in front of x squared, which is 2. B is the number in front of x, which is negative 3. And C is our constant, which is negative 5. So let's plug it into our equation. So the first thing I have is the opposite of B. So B is negative 3. The opposite of that is positive 3. So I have 3 plus or minus, got my radical. First thing in parentheses under the radical is b squared, so that's negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. So all over 2 times a. So last time I was talking about that you have to make sure that you put b squared in parentheses, and this is why. So that b that you're squaring is a negative 3. If you don't put it in parentheses, it's going to give you a negative, and that's really going to mess up your answers. So make sure you put it in parentheses. So now we simplify everything under the radical. So negative 3 squared gives me 9. And then I have plus, because I've got negative 4 times 2 times negative 5, which gives me 40. So this is what I got. I got radical 40. Well, now let's combine those and plug it into our equation. So we've got 3 plus or minus radical 49 all over 4, because 2 times 2 gives me 4. Well, now let's keep simplifying it. So the square root or radical 49 gets me 7. So that's 3 plus or minus 7 over 4. So let's find each of those zeros, because it breaks off into 2. So I got 3 plus 7 divided by 4. And 3 minus 7 divided by 4. Well, what's nice is 3 plus 7 gives me 10 and over 4. Well, 10 divided by 4, that gives me about 2.5. Feel free to round, nothing too crazy. The next one I have 3 minus 7, which gives me 4 over 4, which gives me a negative 1. So x here is negative 1 and 2.5. All right, on to the next one. So as you can see, for number 5, it is not set equal to 0, and we need it to be. So I need it to be 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So for this one here, it's not, so we need to move all of this over to the other side. So I've got that 9x, so I'm going to subtract it, and I'm going to add 20 over. So x squared minus 9x plus 20. So make sure you do that, because if not, you're going to get the answer incorrect because all your a, b's, and c's will be messed up. So a is 1, because that's the number in front of x squared. B is negative 9, and c is 20. Well, let's plug it into our formula. First thing we got is the opposite of b. So that's 9 plus or minus radical. I got my b squared in parentheses, so negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 20. Because I'm doing times a times c. All over 2 times a, which is just 1. So now I need to find out what's under the radical. So negative 9 squared gives me 89. It's 89. And then we've got negative 4 times 1 times 20, which gives me minus 80. So now let's plug that radical back in. So I've got 9 plus or minus radical 9 all over 2. Well, the square root of 9 is 3, so 9 plus or minus 3 all over 2. Split it up into 2. 9 plus 3 over 2. 9 minus 3 over 2. So we find those. 9 plus 3 gives us 12 over 2, which gives me 6. 9 minus 3 gives me 6 divided by 2, which gives me 3. So my answers here are 6 and 3. So what I want you to do is do that same process for number 6. Okay, but make sure you have it set equal to 0 first. So bring over everything over there by inverse operations. Okay, go ahead and pause me, and when you're ready, push play. All right, so number 6 can be kind of tricky, but let's go ahead and check your answer. So we move over 6x and 3. You subtract 6x, you add over 3. So a is 3, b is negative 6, c is 3. So we plug it into our formula, and we can see when we simplify the radical that you have 36 minus 36, which gives you 0. So that cancels out, and we're left with 6 divided by 6, which equals 1. So you didn't need to split it up into 2 because that radical canceled out. All right, so go ahead and get started on this worksheet. If you have any questions or need any help, please let us know. See ya.